You're listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles.
My name is Matt, one of the pastors here. Glad to be with you this morning, opening up God's Word together. When I was a kid, I spent most of my childhood playing hockey, and hockey players are notoriously unintelligent in a variety of ways. But one of the things that we used to do a lot of, which was also very foolish, was after practice, we would do this thing called locker boxing. And what locker boxing is basically you get off the ice and you're really tired and everything, and basically you keep all of the pads. It's hockey, so you wear like tons of pads. You keep all the pads you have on kind of your lower half. You keep on your ice skates, and you keep on your gloves, but you take off your helmet, you take off everything else, and you basically just box each other in the locker room. So this is obviously foolish in a variety of ways, and people get hurt all the time. But I remember one time where I was challenged to box by a guy on my team named Josh. And I was like, yeah, of course, I could take Josh easily. And so we kind of line up, and what I don't realize is Josh is someone who has probably about 8 inches of reach on me, as he has longer arms than I do. And I get up, and at first with locker boxing, it's kind of fun and casual. And so I come up, and I'm very casual, and we stand up, and Josh is not very casual, and he immediately pops me in the face, and my lip starts bleeding, and then he pops me in the stomach very quickly, and immediately the wind is knocked out of me. And I'm sitting there laying on the floor thinking, wow, I probably should have approached that a little bit differently. And as we've been preaching through this book, Ecclesiastes, and I feel like Ecclesiastes is kind of like locker boxing. I feel like we come to life, or we come to things in our lives, and immediately what happens is we can be very casual about certain topics in our lives. We can be very casual about the things in our lives that actually are really significant. And what happens to us is we're casual, and we walk up kind of joking, messing around, and all of a sudden life, or the preacher, or God, take your pick, punches us in the stomach and punches us in the mouth, and then all of a sudden we're laying there writhing in pain, wondering what happened. And that's a lot what life is like. For those of you who've experienced a lot of life, for those of you who've walked through a lot of suffering or difficulty in life, life can be like that sometimes. And that's a lot like what happens when you, I think, in the book of Ecclesiastes, encounter the truth that God has for us. Sometimes we're casual about really significant, really important things in life, and God needs to wake us up a little bit and show us what's true. And I think the book of Ecclesiastes does that really well, and it's going to do that today with our topic. Our topic today is the topic of money. It's an interesting topic, and one that I think is really, really compelling for us to look at. So if you have your Bibles, open with us to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and get ready to have the wind knocked out of you. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, I'm going to be preaching, you're not doing any preaching. We're going to be preaching Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 8 through chapter 6, verse 12. Brian last week preached, by the way, chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. 7 verses. I get a chapter and a half today. One of us puts together the sermon schedule. I'll let you figure out which one does that. That's okay. All the commentaries divided here, he says. Okay, chapter 5, verse 8, and it's about a chapter and a half, so stay with me. Preacher writes, "If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place? All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? This is the word of the Lord. Now, there's a lot of confusing verses in here. There's a lot of verses that are going to take you probably a few times to read through, and I hope I can explain a little bit some of the more confusing verses. As I was reading the passage this week, I had to read it over and over and over again to really understand what's going on here. But overall, as kind of a summary of this passage, let me kind of explain what the preacher's doing here. The preacher is giving these vignettes, these stories about different people and their experiences with money and wealth. He describes power and oppression. He describes and tells a story of a guy who has a bunch of money and then loses all of his money. He describes a guy who gets a bunch of money and then can't enjoy it. And it ends at the end of chapter 6 with this idea that mankind is not really in control of anything. We're not, he says, able to dispute with one who is stronger than he. You can kind of picture a big kid. I remember a neighbor of mine doing this to me when I was younger. A big kid holding a little kid's head while he tries to swing and punch with futility. The big kid is God, and we can fight him all we want, swinging and hitting nothing but air, but it's a losing battle. Not able to dispute with one who is stronger than us. And so there's these stories about money, and surrounding these stories in this passage, there's this proverbial wisdom, and there's truths about money and wealth sprinkled throughout. The preacher kind of takes a look around, Takes a look around the world and sees how money and wealth and prestige and influence are seen and understood, and he offers God's perspective on these issues. And in many ways, what I think as we are going to dig deeper into this passage today, in many ways what we see here are truths that stand in sharp contrast to the way that we often view money. In contrast, I think, to what a lot of us tend to believe about life and wealth and money and success and honor and the American dream. There's a lot of things in here, a lot of truths in this passage that stand in sharp contrast to what we often believe. And so the truths of this passage, and I was trying to figure out how do you frame, how do you structure and frame a sermon around such a complex and really large passage. But what I'm going to do today is the truths of this passage. I think what they do, they show us that there are three lies about money that we often believe. And that will be the structure for our message today. 3 lies about money that we often believe. The first lie comes up in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 5. And the lie is that money won't corrupt me. Look at verses 8 and 9. He starts, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor, and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gained for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. The preacher describes looking around and seeing this oppression of the poor, a lack of righteousness, a lack of justice in the land, and each escalating level of power and authority is full of corruption. Do not be amazed. The high official is watched by a higher, and there are higher ones over them. And he's pointing out the fact that wealth and power, money, influence, however you want to define it, oftentimes brings corruption in the world. And he says, don't be amazed when you see this. It's pretty relevant in our world, I would say. It's a lot of political scandals constantly in the news. People in power taking advantage of the poor, violating justice. Reading a newspaper, you see that this happens constantly, over and over again. There are so many scandals like this right now, particularly right now, that giant, massive scandals come out seemingly weekly, and we forget about them the next day. And it's not really shocking for us. I think we in America are generally skeptical of those in power, of political leaders. But this is taking place in ancient Israel where it's a theocracy. There's this sense, this idea, they probably had some different expectations for their leaders. The preacher basically said, nope, it's humans all the way up and they're all corrupt. Look around, see whoever's in power, see the way they use that power, see what they wield it for, see what they use it for, what its purposes are for. Oftentimes it's just to benefit themselves. Oftentimes this power and money and wealth and influence just breeds corruption. And we've seen multiple times in Ecclesiastes already that God cares profoundly for the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed. God is not callous to these realities, and he calls for us to fight for justice and righteousness in our society. But the preacher is saying, look around. Those who have power, those who have money, are often corrupt. Open your eyes. Verse 9 is kind of a weird verse. It's actually, if you have an ESV Bible, there's a little note, and it says uncertainty in the Hebrew, which is helpful for me as I'm preaching the passage. You can read it a couple different ways, but in the ESV, the way they translate it, but this is gained for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. Meaning there's this idea that there are good kings, and it's possible to have kings that are caring about the people and cultivating the fields and caring about the poor and the marginalized, but how rarely do we actually see that in our world? It's rare to have a good king whose priorities are larger than simply taking care of himself. It's rare to have political leaders who genuinely care about those in society. And we should not be amazed when we see this kind of corruption in our world. And it's interesting because the reality is that money and power often naturally lead to corruption in our world, in the hearts of mankind. There's something about money and power that are just incredibly compelling to our hearts. Naturally, there's something compelling about having lots of money or having lots of power. Chapter 6, verse 9, the preacher calls this the wandering of the appetite, meaning there's this idea that is deeply ingrained in us. It's like visceral in us, this idea of desiring money and power and influence in society. It's very integral and natural to us and compelling to us. And I think it's an interesting thought to consider why money is so powerful and compelling to us. I think in many ways, the reason for this is that money, and I would argue all the other topics that the preacher has gone through in Ecclesiastes so far, pleasure, achievement, legacy, all of these topics, they all have this tendency in our world to serve as a functional God for us. Money in our world has a tendency to function almost like a God. It functions like a God in our society. It gives you the benefits of a God. It offers a kind of blessing in your life. Oftentimes it gives you meaning, something to chase after, something to pursue. You're shown and you're given actually a numerical value of how valuable and important you are. You have a reason to live. And money is compelling, I think, also because in a lot of ways it makes you like God. If you have a lot of money, you can get what you want. You get whatever you want. You have enough money to get what you want. You're kind of like God. And all of this, money is so compelling for us as a false God in this world. All of it is because we also don't have anyone telling us what to do. You're in charge. You're in control. I think it's prideful to think that we are beyond this. You know, most of us in here aren't political leaders and people with crazy amounts of wealth and status and power in society. So we think, oh yeah, the corrupt people are out there. We'd be very prideful to think that this is beyond us. Because money is very powerful and compelling to our hearts. Let's say you have a grandfather who passes away and leaves you a large amount of money. There's an assumption in our hearts naturally that says, oh, I will be the same person still. This money won't change me. Or let's say you get a promotion at work, and the natural instinct is to say, awesome, that's great. But if you're not careful, if you're not fighting, purposefully and intentionally fighting to stay humble and find your hope in God alone, it can easily lead you to power tripping or greed. This passage calls us to watch our hearts around money, to be careful of how money can pull on you, especially in workplace environments where people don't have the same values you do. Be careful how you see money and view money. Be careful of your heart when your situation around money changes and you end up with more money than maybe you expected, because it's powerful and can sway your heart from God. Don't be naive. We think that money can't corrupt us, but we should be very, very, very careful. That's the first lie. The second lie we see in this passage that we often believe, and I think the heart of the lies in this passage, is that money will solve my problems. Look at verses 10 through 17 with me. The preacher says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There's a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. The preacher points out that this is not an issue with money itself. Money is not the problem. It's an issue of loving money. We see this in 1 Timothy chapter 6 as well, when Paul writes, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It's a question of your posture towards money in your life. How important is money in your life? And is there a thought, this is hard for us to think through, hard for us to actually reflect on. Is there a thought somewhere deep in your heart that sees money as the solution to the problems in your life? Sometimes in church we can downplay the importance of money, but I actually think it can serve as a disservice to the reality and devastation of poverty. It would be really easy for me to come up here and say, don't think about money so much. Money's not a big deal. Just stop thinking about it so much. It's easy for me to do that because I'm middle class. The reality is that poverty is devastating, and the lack of money and the lack of opportunity that prevents someone in poverty from getting out of poverty are brutal, terrible, and systemic in our society. There are problems that money can solve. Crazy. There are problems that money can solve. They are money problems. If you're in a lot of debt, for example, having more money would be really helpful. Right? All of you in debt. There are ways that money is helpful to problems in life. And there's a reality to the fact that poverty and the lack of money is very devastating in our world. I don't want to undersell that at all. But the issue we have so often in our lives is that we think that money can solve problems that it really can't. The issue is that we like to think that money will solve our problems and satisfy our souls. And I think the reason for this in our lives is if we reduce all of the problems we have in our lives to money problems, it means that there's actually nothing really wrong with us. All of the problems in our life are external to us, and there's no need for us to deeply look into our hearts and ask God to change us from the inside out. If the problems in our lives are just money problems, then there's nothing in your heart or about you that needs to change. Why are you angry? If I just had more money, I wouldn't be so angry. Why are you jealous? If I just had more money, I wouldn't be jealous. Why are you so anxious? Why do you worry all the time? If I just had more money, I wouldn't be anxious. I wouldn't worry. It gives you a convenient thing to blame, and it allows you to overlook the real issues in your heart. And what this passage shows us is that if you think that money solves a particular problem in your life, X, if you think that money is going to solve your worrying problem, most of the time it actually makes your problems worse. When you try to use money as a solution to problems that are not money problems, it often exacerbates those problems, making them worse. It's called the Cobra effect. There's this story about the British at the time of colonial rule in India, and they didn't really like all the snakes that were around, and so they passed this law basically saying that we will pay you for any dead snake that you bring to us. And they said, okay, they're hoping that this would get rid of all of the snakes in India. And yet it does the opposite, because what ends up happening, it's the law of unintended consequences. What ends up happening is that people start breeding snakes. It's the cobra effect. It makes the issue worse. The goal was to get rid of the cobras, and it made the problem worse with the wrong solution. And if you think that having a lot of money will bring you satisfaction and happiness in life, you're going to be even more disappointed when you get more money and your soul still isn't satisfied. Imagine I put $1 million in an envelope under one of your seats right now. I thought about actually taping an envelope under the pews with a note that said "gotcha" on it. But I thought that would be cruel. $1 million. Would that solve problems in your life, or would it cause it? The reality is that almost all of your problems are still there and are likely to be actually worse. You'll have the same spiritual emptiness, just with a bigger wallet, which probably makes you feel even emptier. The same pride and selfishness, same sin struggles, just masked behind luxury and comfort. And we see this throughout the rest of this section in chapter 5. We believe that money solves our problems, but it really doesn't. Look at verse 11. It says, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? You'll have the same relational problems. You have $1 million in your bank account, but you're going to have the same relational problems that you had before. Scott preached a few weeks ago talking about the power of community and the stumbling blocks to true community that are jealousy and pride. If you don't have any close relationships, having money won't change that. In fact, oftentimes having a bunch of money, $1 million in an envelope under your seat, will actually bring around a lot of people who pretend to be your friend who actually aren't. There's story after story of lottery winners experiencing verse 11 over and over again in their life. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. People who don't actually care about you at all, they just want a little piece of the pie. Distant cousins and old friends from high school coming out of the woodwork, suddenly back in the picture wanting to be friends. And there's stories and stories of people who sneakily try to swindle lottery winners out of their winnings. And the point of the preacher is this: if you didn't have friends and family who loved you before you had money, having money is not going to solve that problem. He continues, look at verse 12. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats a little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. You might have a lot of money, but you're going to have the same anxiety and worry. A laborer who works hard and is content sleeps well. But fascinatingly, it's the full stomach that won't let the rich person sleep. A person who loves money and lives for money is going to constantly worry about money no matter how much they have. And in the same way, if you're someone who worries about money and is anxious about your money now, as little as you have, the solution to that problem is not to have more money. Your anxiety and your worry will not disappear, because anxiety and worry are not money problems, they're heart problems. Worry comes from fear and frustration about not being in control of all the elements in your life, and is not dependent on your circumstances. Whether you have $1 or $1 million in your bank account, you can worry about money. Anxiety and worry is caused by our hearts and not by our situations. And for the rich person, it's his full stomach that lets him not sleep. And then the preacher launches into a story in verses 13 and 14. He says, there's a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. If you're greedy without money, you'll be greedy with money. In the story, a rich man makes a bad business decision out of greed and loses everything. It says that he kept his money to his hurt. This idea of kept is he clung to it. He held on to it. He obsessively guarded and protected it. The rich man was greedy, and his greed didn't disappear just because he had money. This is fascinating and hard for us to grasp. This is true for you, no matter who you are. You can be greedy whether you are rich or whether you are not rich. Greed, like worry and anxiety, is not about your situation. It's about your heart. Money is not the solution, and money is not the cause of this man's problems, but a heart that is greedy. It continues, verses 15 to 16. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? You can have however much money you have, you still have to deal with the reality of eternity waiting for you when you pass. It doesn't change eternity. It doesn't solve eternity. Even if this man didn't lose everything, what would he have been able to take with him? Money does not and cannot solve the issue of eternity. Then verse 17, it continues. Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness in much vexation and sickness and anger. He has the same vexation, the same sickness, the same anger. Money doesn't solve this issue. All of these issues are heart realities. Worry, anger, anxiety, greed, frustration, sickness. None of these problems are solved by money. And one of the most pervasive and constant confusions, I think, in the American church is the thought that if I just had more money, I wouldn't be having the problems that I'm having. And no one says it out loud. I know you don't say it out loud. We don't. We know we're not supposed to say it. But we think it and we feel it deep in our hearts. If I just had more money, I wouldn't be having these problems. And they are absolute 100% bald-faced lies that we so often believe. Money solves very few problems. And it, in fact, can make many problems that we have already much worse. And that leads us to this question. If this is true, why do we want it so much? Why do we think about it? Think about what you would buy with that $1 million in an envelope under your seat. Think about the vacations you could take, the house you could buy, maybe. $5 million. The restaurants you could eat at, the clothes you could buy. Your life could be fancier and easier and more comfortable, but your bank account cannot solve the problems of your heart. Leads us to the third lie. The third lie is that money will bring me the power to enjoy life. Look at the beginning of chapter 6. Another vignette, another story. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good. Do not all go to the one place. Here's the second story. The first story is of a man who loses all of his money, and the second story is of a man who lacks nothing of all that he desires, but he doesn't have the power to enjoy it. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. This man has everything someone in ancient Israel would want. The preacher even elaborates, if he had this and if he had this, on other things more hypothetically. Even if he fathered 100 children, which obviously this is a bigger deal in ancient Israel than it is for us. None of you are thinking, wow, I would be really successful if I fathered 100 children. I hope not. But for the people of ancient Israel, this is like the ultimate achievement, having lots of kids and living long years. This is like what it means to be blessed by God. It's what it means to have everything, to be successful and have achievement. And he says, the preacher says, it's better to be a stillborn child. A stillborn child whose name is covered in darkness, who's never seen the sun, and is better off than this guy with everything. Why? Here is a man with money and everything that his desires could want, but without the power to enjoy it. This is a radical and challenging truth. This is a truth that absolutely turns our entire world and society on its head. What this means is that money itself cannot give us power, any power to enjoy life. Think about that. I don't want to be harsh. I don't think there are many of us in this room who actually believe that. I think for all of us, there's this underlying thing, this underlying set of beliefs and Americanism, for lack of a better word, that says the power to enjoy life is directly related to the amount of money I have. This truth absolutely turns our world upside down. And even though there's example after example after example after example in our world of people who seemingly have everything and yet lack joy, we still think, but not me. It would be different for me. And it leads us to God's truth, because it says in 6:2 that it's God who gives the power to enjoy life. And so I want to look at 5:18 through 20 to close us out and say, what does this mean to have the power to actually enjoy life? This is what he says. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. What the preacher says is that the power to enjoy life is found in this thing that is so rare in our world, but is central to what it means to live a life as a Christian in this world, and it is contentment. The power to enjoy life is rooted in the reality of contentment. And contentment isn't an issue of how much you have. Like all these other issues, it's an issue of your heart. Contentment at its core is trusting God. It's recognizing that we're not in control in the world. Look at 18 through 20. All of it is about receiving what God has given him, the gift of God, because God keeps him occupied. It's all about receiving. It's all about recognizing that we're not in control, that we're not able to dispute with one who is stronger than us, that we can either try to punch the wind or we can rest ourselves in God's sovereignty, in the fact that he's in charge of everything, and we can receive what he's given us as a gift and only a gift. And not put our hope and our stock into it, not find our identity or meaning or purpose in it, whether it's a lot or whether it's a little. You lose the power to properly enjoy God's gifts when you demand that they give you something they were never designed to give you. You can never enjoy what God has given you if you try to squeeze heaven out of something that was not designed to give you heaven. As a sermon earlier, a few weeks ago, Scott talked about, like a vacation, and you just think about it every day. It's this thing you get excited for, the thing you hope for. And when you put all your hope and stock in this vacation, it's going to be this functional savior for the mundane realities and difficulties of your life. And you get there and it's disappointing because the flight is delayed, and the people above you in the hotel are loud, and no one is having a good time, and you get sick, and all of this disappointment because you put all this hope and stock into this vacation, and it lets you down. And the same is true with money. The same is true in this situation. A vacation can never satisfy your soul, and money can never satisfy your soul either. It's not because you don't have enough. It's because money was never designed to satisfy your soul. I think one of the most compelling things about money to us is it gives us the illusion of control. I can buy what I want, I can do what I want, I can have what I want, but you can't, without the power to enjoy the good gifts that God has given you, without contentment, grounded in a heart fully and completely satisfied in God, you will never, without qualification, you will never truly enjoy your life no matter how much money you have. Because your soul was designed to be satisfied in God alone. $10 million is too small for your soul. All the money in the world is too small for your soul. It will never satisfy. Money also gives us a false sense of security. If I have money, I'll be safe, I'll be secure, I'll have a future, I'll have all my needs met. But there is no more secure place than resting yourself in the arms of a God who loves you. Money is a terrible God. Money will never satisfy your soul. Money will never take away your sins. You can pay to cover them up, but will never take them away. Money never will give you the life that you think it will. Our God poured out his blood for you so that you could have an eternity, imperishable, undefiled, unfading, perfectly secure, kept in heaven for you. He invites you to a life of contentment, trusting that eternal security is better than temporal security, that eternal satisfaction is better than temporal satisfaction, and that eternal riches are better than all the riches of this world. Pray with me.
Thank you for listening to Cornerstone West Los Angeles. For more information, please visit us on the web at cornerstonewla.org.